Look at this faded Polaroid from 1984. The colors are completely washed out, reduced to muted browns and dull oranges. It's a typical suburban Michigan basement from that era. You've got the cheap faux wood paneling, a dusty shag rug that has seen better days, and this heavy, custom-built cinder block bar and wine rack sitting right in the center of the room. It looks completely ordinary, like the kind of place a blue-collar dad would retreat to after a grueling double shift at the auto plant. But if you look closer at the bottom left corner of this photograph, right where the raw concrete floor meets the bottom tier of that brick wine rack, you can see the faint, dark outline of a police evidence marker. Because for 5 agonizing years, a teenage girl sat on that very shag rug, doing her high school algebra homework, listening to her cassette tapes, utterly oblivious to the fact that her missing mother was entombed inside that cinder block structure, barely 3 feet away from her. And the man bringing her a plate of sandwiches while she studied? The caring, deeply concerned father who wiped away her tears and gently explained that mommy had just suffered a breakdown and didn't love them anymore? He was the one who strangled her, stuffed her into heavy-duty plastic garbage bags, and meticulously mixed the mortar to seal her into the foundation of their family home. It is the ultimate betrayal of trust. When we sift through these yellowed, typewritten case files from Macomb County, Michigan, the chilling part isn't just the physical violence. The blood was washed down a bathroom drain decades ago. No, the true horror of this declassified archive is the psychological torture. The absolute calculated masterclass in gaslighting. We are looking at a highly functional sociopath who manipulated law enforcement, his neighbors, and his own traumatized children for half a decade without ever breaking a sweat. Let's rewind the tape to February of 1979. Warren, Michigan. We are sitting smack in the middle of the Rust Belt during a brutal economic downturn. The oil crisis is in full swing. The auto industry is hemorrhaging jobs, and that crushing, suffocating financial anxiety is bleeding into the living rooms of every blue-collar family in the state. We're looking at the Ford family, Clark and Susan Ford.
After all these years,
By all outward appearances, on the grainy Super 8 home movies you can see from the neighborhood block parties, they are the picture of late 70s suburban stability. They have 2 kids, a son, Sean, who is 18 and starting to rebel, and a 15-year-old daughter named Betsy, who is the absolute apple of her mother's eye. Betsy and Susan have that incredibly tight Gilmore Girls-style bond before that was even a cultural reference. They are inseparable. But there is a rot underneath the floorboards of this suburban dream. You can read it in these smudged, carbon copy interview transcripts from their old coworkers. Clark and Susan had poured their life savings into managing a local diner franchise. They were working insane hours, 80 to 90 hours a week, covering double shifts, drowning in grease and cheap coffee, just to keep the lights on. And it wasn't enough.
Empty again.
I'm holding a Xeroxed copy of a bank foreclosure notice dated January 28, 1979, 2 weeks before the murder. Their diner went bankrupt. The corporate office pulled the franchise. Clark and Susan were fired on the exact same day.
The grocer, and now
Their entire financial reality evaporated in a matter of hours. They were facing immediate eviction from their home, and the stress was nuclear. You can hear the desperation in a recorded cassette interview from one of Susan's few friends, a guy named Ralph. Susan had reached out to him just days before she vanished. On the tape, you hear Ralph recalling how exhausted she sounded. She told him the fighting was constant. Clark was spending money they didn't have to keep up appearances for the kids, buying new winter jackets and electronics, refusing to admit they were entirely broke. Susan was furious. The resentment was a thick fog filling every room of that house. Which brings us to Wednesday, February 14th, 1979, Valentine's Day. The temperature in Warren that morning was hovering near 0. There was a thick sheet of ice on the driveways. According to Clark's own typed confession, which we'll get to later, the kids had just left for school. Susan was in the bathroom, having just finished taking a shower. The bathroom was small, filled with steam, the linoleum floor slick with condensation. Clark
Look
walked
at me when
in,
I'm talking
and the
to you.
fight
Don't you
ignited
dare
instantly.
walk away.
It was the
Please, just-
same bitter
I told you
argument
it
they'd
wouldn't
been
work
having
out. Why
for
did you have to
weeks.
push it?
Money.
Because I thought
The
you
impending ruin. Susan looked at him, completely exhausted by his
They're
denial,
onto us.
and told him she
We
couldn't
have to
take it
clear out
anymore.
before the others arrive.
She blamed
How
him
could
for
you
the
let
lost
this happen?
franchise. She blamed him for their son's rebellious behavior. She told him that by the time she was 50, her life would be over, and she was done carrying the weight of his failures. And in that cramped, steamy space, Clark snapped.
Let go of
He
me.
reached out
Get
and
out.
shoved her.
You're
It
gonna
wasn't a
listen to me now.
calculated
Get in
strike
there.
of a seasoned killer.
No.
It was a vicious, impulsive push. But the floor was wet. Susan lost her footing, slipped backwards, and the back of her skull cracked sickeningly against the porcelain edge of the bathtub. She went down, bleeding profusely onto the cheap bath mat. This is the exact
How
moment
could
where
you
a
be so
normal human
careless?
being,
This changes
a
everything
husband,
for
a
us.
father,
I didn't mean for it to
drops to
happen.
his knees in horror and dials the operator for an ambulance. But you have to understand the mind of a narcissist facing the destruction of his own ego. Clark didn't see his dying wife. He saw his own impending doom. He saw prison. He saw the ultimate public humiliation of his failure. So instead
what
of
you
grabbing
made
a
me
towel
do.
to stop
Look
the
at
bleeding,
me.
Clark Ford dropped to his knees, wrapped his hands around his wife's throat, and he squeezed. He strangled her
Please,
right
wake
there on the
up.
wet linoleum
Say something.
until the
You
life
have to
completely
wake
left
up.
her eyes. The immediate aftermath is a study in cold, reptilian panic. He knew he only had a few hours before the kids got off the school bus. He couldn't drag her out to the station wagon in broad daylight. The neighbors in these tight-knit Detroit suburbs were always looking out their frosty windows. So he went out to the garage and grabbed heavy-duty black industrial garbage bags. He wrapped her body meticulously, sealing it with layers of heavy tape, and dragged her down the wooden stairs into the basement. He dumped the bags in the dark, unfinished corner of the cellar. Then he grabbed a bucket, bleach, and a mop and scrubbed the bathroom spotless. When 15-year-old Betsy walked through the front door that afternoon, dropping her backpack in the hallway, the house smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, but otherwise, everything was perfectly still. She asked where
must
her
go
mom
now
was,
before they come
and
back.
Clark, without a single
look back,
tremor in
just
his
run.
voice, looked his
Listen
daughter in
closely
the
to me
eye
now.
and delivered the lie that would define her existence for the next 5 years.
You can't
He
keep
told her
avoiding
that
this
her mother
forever.
had
We need
packed
to
a
tell them the
bag and
truth.
walked out.
No.
But a simple disappearance wouldn't be enough to satisfy the police or the kids. A narcissistic manipulator knows that to truly sell a lie, you have to provide a villain. And Clark made Susan the villain. A few days later, he casually seeded a detail into the narrative. He told
just doesn't
Betsy
seem
that he
fair,
had
does
seen
it?
Susan come
After
back to the
everything we've been
house while the
through.
kids were at
Fair or
school.
not, it's
But she wasn't alone. He claimed there was a white Chevy van idling in the driveway. He said 2 men were in the van. He gave a vague, unhelpful description to the local police, saying they were tall, maybe in their 30s, rugged-looking. He told his devastated teenage daughter that these men helped Susan load her remaining clothes into the van, and she drove off with them to start a new
Come
life,
on, let's get you home.
abandoning her family
be
without
all
so
right.
much as a goodbye. Think about the psychological devastation of that lie. For a 15-year-old girl whose entire world revolved around her mother, this wasn't just a loss. It was an active, agonizing rejection. You can read the handwritten journal entries from Betsy, logged in the police evidence files. She wrote, "Dear Mom, what did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Why did you leave me here?" And while Betsy was crying herself to sleep, Clark was working the night shift in his own basement. The day after the murder, while the kids were at school, Clark began to mix mortar. He had previously talked about building a custom wine rack and bar in the basement,
First, you want
a
to make
little
sure the
DIY
foundation is
project to
square
spruce up
before
the
you
house.
set the studs.
Now, it became a mausoleum. He laid cinder blocks directly over the plastic bags containing his wife's body. He slathered on thick layers of cement, building a heavy, permanent foundation for the bar, sealing the corpse inside a dark, airtight sarcophagus of his own making. He built the wooden shelves on top of it, sanded them down, and stained them. He turned his wife's grave into a piece of mid-century suburban furniture. But here is where the gaslighting shifts from a cover-up into a daily, systematic abuse.
We always do.
Clark didn't just hide the body. He completely rewrote his own personality. Before the murder, according to the pastoral counseling notes we have from their local church, Clark was an absentee father.
What does this
He was
piece
always
do?
working, emotionally distant, constantly stressed.
That engages the main shaft.
Overnight, he transformed into the quintessential super dad. He started waking up early to pack Betsy's lunches. He helped her with her homework.
Just like that.
He became incredibly emotionally available. He was playing the role of the tragic, abandoned single father, valiantly holding his broken family together. And Betsy, desperate for an anchor in the storm of her mother's sudden departure, clung to him. She transferred all her love and dependency onto the very man who had orphaned her. He even went a step further. Knowing that Susan had always strictly forbidden pets in the house, Clark went out and bought Betsy a golden retriever puppy. He named him Aster. It was a brilliant, twisted, psychological move. He gave her the one thing her mother would never allow, cementing himself as the hero and subtly reinforcing the narrative that life was actually better without Susan. For a while, the illusion held perfectly. Years passed. The calendar flipped from the disco era into the early 1980s. The missing persons file on Susan Ford gathered dust in the basement of the Macomb County precinct. There was no body, no crime scene, and the husband was putting on a masterclass performance of a grieving spouse. And like any good mystery, the universe threw in red herrings that perfectly played into Clark's narrative. In the winter of 1981,
I need
a
to see your
woman
license
matching
and
Susan's
registration.
description
Do you know
was
why I
pulled
pulled you
over
over?
in a routine traffic stop just across the state line in Ohio.
State your name.
The records were purged shortly after, but the rumor made it back to the family. Then, in 1982,
I heard what
a
happened.
woman called the precinct
finishing up
claiming
here
she
now,
saw
and I'll
Susan
head
in a
straight
department
over.
store in downtown Chicago. The caller
They've
was
mobilized the
incredibly
National
specific.
Guard. Get the
She
presses
noted a
rolled.
distinct heart-shaped necklace the woman was wearing, the exact same necklace Susan was wearing on her missing posters. The caller said this woman bought a tube of waterproof mascara, paid in cash, and left. These sightings were phantom echoes,
I tell you, this is the connection
complete
we've been
dead
looking
ends.
for. The timeline.
But for Betsy, they were excruciating. Every false lead was a fresh twist of the knife. It reinforced the agonizing belief that her mother was alive, living a new life just a few hours down the interstate, but simply choosing not to pick up the phone and call her daughter on her birthday. But a lie of this magnitude is like a localized earthquake.
We need to decide.
You can't contain the tremors forever. And the epicenter of the collapse was, ironically, the very gift Clark used to buy his daughter's affection: the dog. Aster the golden retriever had a bizarre habit. Whenever he was let out into the backyard, or allowed to roam down into the basement when the door was accidentally left open, the dog would immediately go to one specific spot. Outside, there was a small rock garden Clark had built right against the foundation of the house, directly adjacent to the basement wall where the wine rack sat inside. Aster would dig frantically at the dirt by the rock garden, and if he was in the basement, he would lay flush against the bottom of the cinder block wine rack, whining and scratching at the concrete. Clark would always scold the dog, dragging him away, laughing it off as just a weird canine quirk. But it wasn't a quirk. The plastic garbage bags Clark used were thick, but they weren't entirely impermeable to the microscopic gases of human decomposition over 5 years. The dog, with its incredibly sensitive olfactory receptors, knew exactly what was beneath the concrete. We are now in 1984. 5 years have passed. Betsy is 20 years old. She has moved out of the house, but she visits her father regularly. Clark has actually finalized a divorce from his missing wife in absentia and has remarried. He thinks he has completely gotten away with the perfect murder, but Betsy can't let it go. The psychological dissonance is tearing her apart. Desperate for closure, she decides to take matters into her own hands.
I warned
She
them
contacts
this would happen,
the
but they
producers of a
refused to
highly
listen.
popular
We are running
regional
out of
investigative television
what
broadcast
happens when the deadline
called
passes?
Michigan's Unsolved.
If we follow this route exactly,
Think
it
of
leads
it
us
as a
right to the
gritty,
railway yard.
localized
He couldn't have
precursor
gone
to
any other way.
Unsolved
What
Mysteries.
about the tunnels?
It was
risky
shot
in this
on
weather.
heavy broadcast
President today
cameras,
addressed Congress
hosted by a
regarding the ongoing
stern-looking
steel
anchor
strike,
in a brown
urging
suit,
both.
and beamed into thousands
It
of
is
living rooms across
imperative
the
that
state.
every American.
Betsy begs
Are we
her
gonna
father
have
to
to leave
participate.
soon?
She tells him that maybe, just maybe, if her mother sees the broadcast, she will finally reach out. Clark, trapped by his own facade of the caring father, has no choice but to agree. He sits down for the camera crew in his living room, wearing a beige sweater, looking solemnly into the lens, and repeats the lie about the two men in the white Chevy van. But when the episode airs on a Tuesday night in November, the cracks in Clark's armor finally become visible to the people closest to him. Betsy and her best friend Peggy are sitting on a floral-patterned couch watching the broadcast on a heavy CRT television. And Peggy notices something. Peggy has spent countless hours at the Ford house over the last 5 years. She remembers
You have to
Clark
believe me,
explicitly
officers.
telling the
It
police
happened right there
and
by the
everyone
corner.
else
He just
that
took
he
off
didn't
down
get
the
a good
street
look
before
at
I
the
could
men in
stop
the
him.
van. He always claimed he only saw them from behind, from a distance. But on the
I'm telling
television
you,
broadcast,
the evidence is right
playing
here.
the role
They
of
have
the
until
helpful
6
witness
p.m.
for the
to confess.
cameras,
They told
Clark
us that
suddenly
prosperity
provides
was
highly
just around the
specific
corner.
details.
But I look out today.
He describes their builds,
Look at 'em.
their hair
They're waiting
colors,
for something.
the exact
We
model
need to get
of the
out
van.
the back way before they come
Peggy
in.
turns
has
to
to be
Betsy
handled
and says,
discreetly. If
"Why
word
is he
gets out,
suddenly
the operation
remembering
is
this
finished."
now?
I
Why did he hide this from you?" That single thread of doubt begins to unravel the entire sweater. Once the lens of suspicion is placed over Clark, the seemingly innocent anomalies of the past 5 years become glaring red flags. Peggy brings up the dog. She reminds Betsy how Astor was constantly digging at the foundation, desperately trying to get at something under the ground.
And when they do,
And then, Betsy remembers the jewelry box. A few months prior, while looking for old winter gear in her father's basement, she had stumbled across a small, ornate wooden jewelry box tucked away on a high shelf behind some paint cans. It was her mother's jewelry box. It had been pried open with a screwdriver, the lock shattered. It was empty. But Clark had always maintained that Susan took all her jewelry with her when she fled with the men in the van. Why would her forcefully broken jewelry box be hidden in the basement? The cognitive dissonance shatters.
How can this be?
The horrifying reality begins to bleed into Betsy's consciousness. She is terrified. She doesn't want to believe her father is a monster. But her friend Peggy doesn't have those familial blinders. Peggy goes straight to the Macomb County Sheriff's Department. Let me read you an excerpt from the typewritten intake report filed by Detective Frank Willis, dated November 18, 1984. Quote, "Met with an informant, 21-year-old female,
You mustn't worry so
close
much.
friend
Everything-
of the Ford family.
I don't know what we're
Informant
gonna
expressed
do.
severe apprehension regarding
Everything
the father,
we worked for
Clark
is
Ford.
gone.
Informant detailed erratic behavior concerning the basement area,
You don't
obsessive
understand. We have to
guarding of a
use these
specific
blocks
cinder
now
block
before they
structure,
shut us down.
and the anomalous
Using-
behavior of the
Open the
family
door,
canine
quickly.
at the exact same location.
We don't have much time. You have to
Informant
open. I saw the whole
believes the
thing right
missing
here by these
person,
doors.
Susan
They
Ford,
dragged them down
never
there
left the
fast.
premises.
Who did you see?
End quote. This is the tipping point. The detectives review the original 1979 file.
We know you were there.
They
that
see the lack of evidence of Susan ever leaving. They look at the
We interrupt
sudden,
this
conflicting
program to bring you a
statements
special
Clark made
news
on the
bulletin.
television broadcast,
The situation
and
remains.
they take it to a judge. They
We
secure
have
a
reason to
massive,
believe the evidence is in the
comprehensive
south
search
field.
warrant for the
We need to
property.
start digging.
And they do not do this quietly. When the police arrive at the Ford residence on a freezing, overcast morning a few days later,
Get back inside
it is an
now. You are
overwhelming
harboring
show
a
of force.
fugitive.
No, please,
Detective
you
Found
Willis
something.
later described it
Looks like
in
a
a
38
retrospective
special.
interview
Bag it, see?
as calling in the
And check the Vicks
entire
pockets.
orchestra of death. Imagine the scene. It's a quiet suburban street lined with bare oak trees. Suddenly, a convoy of unmarked cruisers and heavy tactical trucks rolls up to the curb. Dozens of officers in heavy winter jackets spill out. They bring
Hold it
floodlights.
steady right
They
there.
bring industrial jackhammers. And most importantly, they bring 2 highly trained cadaver dogs from the State Police Canine Unit. Clark is standing in the doorway of his home. He is wearing slacks and a button-down shirt. The lead detective
The bank
walks up the
finalized the
driveway,
foreclosure.
hands him the
We need you
typewritten
off the
warrant,
property by
and
the
looks
end of the
him
week
dead in
in
the eye.
Struxy. Where
He
are we?
tells Clark
We need to release
the
this
game
information
is over.
immediately.
We are going to tear this property apart, brick by brick, until we find her. According to the
We know you
officers
were
on
there,
the
so you
scene,
might as well
Clark's
confess.
face went entirely devoid of color.
I swear.
The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like a corpse himself. He didn't say a word. He didn't protest. He silently stepped aside. The officers
Wasn't
move
inside.
into the house.
Let's check the vehicle before
They
they're
deploy
picking
the
up a scent
cadaver
over here.
dogs.
All right.
The dogs sweep the main floor. Nothing. They sweep the bedrooms. Nothing. Then, the handler leads a dog down the wooden stairs into the basement. The dog doesn't even hesitate. It ignores the boxes of old clothes. It ignores the workbench. It walks in a straight, deliberate line across the shag rug, stops dead at the base of the cinder block wine rack, sits down, and barks. It is the universal canine signal for human remains. The technical
Be on the
unit
left.
moves in.
Yeah, give me the signal.
They clear the dusty bottles of wine off the wooden shelves. They fire up the heavy pneumatic jackhammers in the enclosed space of the basement. The noise is deafening. Dust and concrete shrapnel fly into the air. They chip away at the heavy layers of mortar Clark had painstakingly laid 5 years earlier. And then, a steel chisel breaks through the masonry and punctures a thick layer of black industrial plastic hidden inside the cavity of the blocks. The moment that plastic seal is broken, the 5-year vacuum is destroyed. Oxygen rushes into the sarcophagus, and what escapes is a smell so profoundly overwhelming, so purely concentrated with the stench of human decomposition, that seasoned detectives have to rush up the stairs and burst out the front door, vomiting into the snow. The smell permeates the entire structure in seconds. It drifts out into the street. It is the undeniable, inescapable scent of the
factory
truth.
closes tomorrow.
They
Listen to
find
me
her.
now. This is the only way.
Susan Ford, curled in a fetal position, wrapped in garbage bags, her skull fractured, her body mummified by the dry, airtight conditions of the concrete tomb. They place Clark Ford in handcuffs right there in his own driveway. They drive him to the cold, fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms of the Macomb County Precinct. The tape recorder clicks on. The static hisses, and Clark finally drops the mask. He doesn't ask for a lawyer. He just sighs, a sound of profound exhaustion, and confesses to the entire thing. He details the argument, the slip, the strangulation, the bags, the cement. He is eventually charged, but because of the nature of the fight, because there was no premeditation to the initial physical altercation,
You don't
his
understand. I didn't
high-priced
kill her.
defense attorney
You have to
manages
believe me.
to
I
secure
swear
a
I
plea
didn't do
deal.
it.
In
Just tell the truth,
1985, Clark Ford is sentenced to just 8 years in a Michigan state penitentiary for voluntary manslaughter. 8 years. He is out in less than 6. And this is where the traditional true crime narrative usually fades to black. The killer is caught, the gavel drops, justice is technically served.
Look at these
But if we want
photographs.
to truly understand the anatomy of this case, we have to look at the collateral damage. We have to look at the blue ocean of trauma left in the wake of this gaslighting. Because an 8-year prison sentence is an absolute joke compared to the life sentence Clark handed down to his own daughter. Think about the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of Betsy's reality. For 5 of her most formative
It's
years,
worse than we
from
thought.
age 15 to
The
20,
records confirm the
her
shortfall.
entire worldview was a meticulously constructed stage play directed by her mother's murderer. Every sandwich he made her, every time he checked her homework, every time he hugged her while she cried over her mother's abandonment, he was performing over the bones of the woman he killed. When the
This
truth
proves
finally
everything
came
we
out,
suspected
it
about
acted
him.
like a magnifying glass focusing the
They can't
sun
know we
onto
found
dry
this.
tinder. It incinerated Betsy's fundamental ability to trust anything in the universe. She had to grapple with an impossible, agonizing duality. She was filled with a blinding, volcanic rage toward the man who stole her mother. But simultaneously, because of the 5 years of intense psychological conditioning, she still viewed him as her primary caretaker, her protector. You do not just turn off that kind of deeply ingrained dependency overnight. It breaks the human brain. Years later, long after the dust had settled and the newspapers had turned to other tragedies, Betsy tried to build a normal life. She got married, she advanced in her career, she decided it was time to buy her own home. And this brings us to the most haunting detail in this entire archive. an insight that tells you more about the long-term devastation of psychological abuse than any autopsy report ever could.
Right
When
here on the
Betsy
plat
met with
map,
her
the
real
lines are
estate
clearly
agent to look at
defined.
properties
It's
in
a
the
sound
Michigan
investment.
suburbs,
See this section
she
here.
had only
The foundation
one
shows signs of settling from
non-negotiable
the 38
demand.
flood.
It didn't matter about the school district. It didn't matter about the square footage or the style of the roof. She told the agent with
The deal is
absolute
done.
stone-cold
Now
clarity,
we proceed as planned.
the house cannot have a basement. I will not look at a split level. I will not look at a house with a cellar. It must be built on a flat, solid concrete slab. Because the trauma of knowing she had slept, laughed, and lived just a few feet above the rotting corpse of her mother had permanently rewired her survival instincts. The very concept of a subterranean space, a dark place beneath the floorboards where secrets could be buried in cement, was paralyzing to her. She refused to ever step foot in a basement for the rest of her life. And that is the true, lingering horror of this archive. It's not the blood on the bathroom tile. It's not the jackhammers tearing apart the cinder blocks. It's the terrifying realization of how easily a monster can wear the mask of a loving father. How
We can't stay
effortlessly
here.
someone you
The
trust
bank owns this
implicitly
land
can
now,
rewrite
and
your
the dust
entire
keeps
reality,
coming. We have to get
leaving you
west.
completely blind to the fact that you are standing directly on top of a grave. It forces you to look at the people in your own life, the ones who make your coffee, the ones who sleep next to you, and wonder about the things left unsaid. It makes you wonder how easily we accept the convenient lies of the people we love, simply because the alternative is too horrific to look at.